Good afternoon. I'm Jim Townsend, and I'm the director of the Carl Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy at Wayne State University Law School. Welcome to today's post-election analysis panel discussion, and thank you for joining us. We at the Levin Center are so pleased to have two distinguished guests who will give us their analysis of what happened in this week's election and a sense of what to expect from Washington in 2023. But before we get underway, I want to say a few words about the Levin Center. The late U.S. Senator Carl Levin founded the Levin Center in 2015 with the mission to advance bipartisan, fact-based oversight and civil discourse as instruments of change. In the past few years, the Levin Center has trained hundreds of congressional staff in the techniques of investigations and oversight, and we are now bringing that training to the state and local level and even lawmakers overseas. We support the conduct of research. We conduct research, I should say, on government transparency and accountability. And we advocate for the right of the legislative branch to conduct oversight to ensure that government keeps its promises. We also bring experts and leaders from around the country to engage in civil discourse about important issues. So today we will hear from U.S. Representative Debbie Dingell, a Democrat representing Michigan's 6th Congressional District, and U.S. Representative John Moolenaar, a Republican who represents Michigan's 2nd Congressional District. And let me first say to both of you, congratulations on your victories in Tuesday's election.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm going to ask Debbie and John to give some opening comments in response to a question, and then we will have kind of an open, Q&A and so on after that I will moderate along with my colleague, Ben Eikey, who is the State Training and Development Manager at the Levin Center. Ben served as a staff member in the Michigan House of Representatives working on the Republican side, and he was also a congressional fellow in Washington in Congressman Moolenaar's office. So Ben, if you want to say hello for a moment.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here with us this afternoon. Looking forward to a great conversation, and it's really nice to be just even a part of the conversation with some people I really admire. So I'm just looking forward to being of assistance. Thank you all for being here.
I'll close things out at the end with some concluding remarks, and I want to say to everybody in the audience, and we have an audience online, as well as a group of law students at Wayne State's Law School gathered who are watching together. To submit questions via the Zoom question function that we have, and Ben and I will do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. Now to our panelists. We're going to kick things off with Congressman Moolenaar. John Moolenaar brings years of leadership and experience both in the private and the public sectors to his job in Congress. He has worked as a chemist, a business development director, and as a school administrator. In public service, John has been elected to the Midland City Council, to the Michigan House of Representatives, and the Michigan Senate. And John and his wife, Amy, have raised 6 children. John has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Hope College and a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. So, John, I'm going to kick things off with you. And then I'll ask the same question of Congresswoman Dingell. What is your take on the election? How do you think the election went, and what do you think the results mean for Michigan and our country?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, for the opportunity, and appreciate the Levin Center for hosting us today. And it's also great to see Ben Eikey, who worked with me on our staff as a Reeker Fellow for 6 months, and really appreciated his contribution. And of course, it's always great to be with Debbie Dingell, my friend, who we have offices right across from each other in the Cannon building. And we came in at the same time, and we've found ways to work together, helping veterans, senior citizens, working on the Great Lakes together. She helped with some of the flood issues in my district and involving failing dams and working to make things safer. So it's wonderful to be with you and your students, both in person as well as those online. And just thanks for your interest. It was I would say it was very different than people anticipated. There were all sorts of speculation about what might happen, a big red wave, or how that might happen. I would say, first of all, individually, I'm just very thankful for the opportunity to serve in a new district. Both Debbie and I had new districts with a lot of new territory. So I spent my time, a lot of time meeting people for the first time in about half of my district who I'd never represented before. And so you knock on doors, you go to parades. My district is 20 counties across northern, western, and even mid-Michigan. So it's a large geographic area. In Michigan, we go from 14 down to 13 representatives in Congress. So that's a new change. But I would say, it was a year where the red wave did not happen. I'm, pleased as a Republican that it looks like we will have a Republican majority in the House of Representatives. Both Debbie and I have served in the majority and in the minority. And what you do in either case is you try and find ways to work together to solve problems for the country. And that's what I hope to continue to work on.
Well, John, thanks so much for that. I'd like to turn to Debbie Dingell and but first like to just let everybody know, Debbie has served, like John, served in Congress since 2015. And but before that had an extensive career in the private sector and in service to our state. She was the chair of the Wayne State University Board of Governors. And during her career in the private sector, she was with General Motors, where she was president of the GM Foundation and a senior executive responsible for public affairs. Debbie, same question for you, kind of just to open things up. What is your take on the election? How do you think it went? And what do you think these results mean for Michigan and the country?
So thanks, Jim, and thanks, Ben. And it's great to be at Wayne State, which in the Levin Center. Senator Carl Levin was a very dear friend, and I worked with him on many issues. And I'm always happy to be here with my friend, John Moolenaar, who, as he said, we came in together and we actually got our offices. I chose my office to be across from John because I thought it was important for people in Michigan to see that people do work together in a bipartisan way. When we were that first year of ours, we had another Republican colleague that was right next door. So we used to call it the Michigan Row. And I think it is important that we all work together. I think that, I made this observation on Monday on Andrea Mitchell, that I did not think it was going to be a red wave. But I thought that, and by the way, in 2016, Andrea Mitchell said to me yesterday, "You are always accurate about what is going to happen on election day." And I don't know, now it's making me nervous, but I told it, I don't think Moolenaar even deleted me when I said that Donald Trump was going to win Michigan in 2016. I told everybody and nobody believed me. And on Monday, I said to people that there are razor thin races across this country. They're a point up or a point down in districts across. And I think there were 3 issues that voters were making their decision on. One was choice. The second one, and I tend to look at choice a little differently than some do, because I think it reflects both it's women's personal health care, but it's a separation of church and state, which is one of the fundamental principles of our Constitution. But choice obviously was a major issue, but so was the economy. And the third was democracy. And I think that there are a lot of people that are disturbed by the vitriolicness that we're seeing that's becoming way too easy in politics today, the fear and hatred that's pitting us against each other. And so I thought that it would be close, whatever was going to happen. And we still don't know if the Republicans or the Democrats are going to have the majority in the House. Whatever it is, it's going to be close. It's going to be the exact same way that it was. We don't know the exact numbers yet, but it's going to be a tight majority in both the House and Senate. We don't have outcomes in either. And I think the American people are tired of the vitriolicness. I think we still have our far right and far left, but it was a message to people to remember what America's about, and that we need to pull together more. And they're tired of partisan bickering. They don't want to see partisan fights. There are a lot of problems that they're worried about, and they want to see us work together to get them done, to solve the problems. And I think that was part of what we saw.
Well, I thought I appreciate both your comments so much, and I want to sort of dig a little deeper into what you think really happened and why it happened. But maybe for, since you're both from Michigan and we're based here in Michigan, I'd start out by just saying, what do you think happened in Michigan, and what accounted for what appears to be, to some degree, Michigan? I guess I want to ask you this question. Do you think Michigan bucked the national trend, or was it, how did Michigan differ? What happened in Michigan differ from what happened nationwide? Maybe Debbie, you go first, and then John, you go second.
I don't think anybody knew for sure what was going to happen in Michigan. Actually, the statewide candidates did, I thought it would be a couple of percentage points, and in most of the cases, it's a 10-point differential. I don't think anybody who won should not think that the economy didn't matter. But I do believe that a lot of people are worried about the direction of the country. And while I think choice was an important issue in Michigan, I think people are very concerned about the vitriolicness that we've been seeing. A lot of these state legislative seats were close. A number of them were in my district, and I really work closely with my state legislators. I'm somebody that's out. I went everywhere with them. I was at farmers markets and fall fests and Halloween parades and trunk or treats and listening to people. And it was close. It really wasn't clear who was going to have the majority in the two state legislatures. And I think that part of that, people's just, wanting to see change and being worried about potential, maybe even though they're not state issues, I think people are worried about what else the Supreme Court might do. But I think that Democrats are going to have to be very careful in how they manage expectations, as Democrats have all three of the statewides and the House and the Senate, and that everybody's going to have a lot of expectation that they're going to deliver on a lot of things. And I think a lot of people want to see, and I think the governor will want to see, an effort for people to just they don't want to hear the fighting. They want to see some problems solved.
John, what's your take on kind of how Michigan stacked up versus the country in terms of what happened in the election? Do you think Michigan bucked the trend, and if so, why?
Well, I do think when you look at the change in the state legislature now, Democratic majorities, I think a lot of that is reflected that this was the first time we'd had an independent redistricting commission that drew new lines, and those lines were dramatically different than previous lines. And so I think that was a big part of at least the change in the state legislative districts. I think statewide, from the start coming out of the conventions, the Democratic candidates were very well-known, established, very well-funded statewide candidates, whereas the Republican candidates were relatively unknown, underfunded, and started at quite a deficit, from day one. And so I do think that matters significantly. In the open seats, I think you also had a situation where there were some very competitive races, and incumbents tended to do better than challengers, with the exception of, there was a few open seats, and that just had to do with sort of the candidate quality. And in the case where we picked up a congressional seat with John James, he's run statewide twice, a very popular, charismatic, candidate, and he ran in a new area and won. I think he ran a good campaign, was well-funded. It's difficult to say whether Michigan was different than the trend nationwide. Certainly Florida had for Republicans, that was one of the first elections, out of the gate. And that was kind of giving rise to this idea of a big red wave when Rubio and DeSantis won so handily in Florida. But then throughout the night, other states came in and it was just sort of a mixed result.
Mhm.
So John, can I say one thing to you with love, not at the congressional level, because the congressionals, I think that your Republican convention was crazy. And the quality of the candidates might have impacted the funding. And I think one of the things that people are looking at in Michigan across the country is the quality of candidates that are being, the quality is not the right word, but some of the things that some of the candidates were encouraging and saying, I think is another, I think had there been different candidates, and it might have been closer in some instances. And I think that's why you saw, I mean, even the Republican candidates in the congressional races were the targeted, well, you had one, I guess I'm not going to get personal, I'm going to keep my, but I think quality of candidates matters in both parties. I'll leave it at that.
Now, Debbie, you made mention of the Dobbs decision, and what that meant for Roe v. Wade, and how that appears to have had an impact on the election.
Federal regulations require all guests carefully control their baggage.
John's at the airport, so occasionally we're going to hear from people from the FAA, I guess. But I guess I'd like to sort of get into that a little bit about just sort of how you think that impacted the election, but also what do you think there's anything we will expect to happen in Washington, in Congress, on the issue of abortion? I don't know, John, why don't you go first? What do you think? How much do you think abortion played a role in Michigan or maybe in some other states? And then what do you think is going to happen in Washington, if anything, on that issue?
Boy, it's difficult to predict what will happen in Washington on that. I think in Michigan, the passage of Proposal 3 is going to be a significant change in our Constitution. And there was a lot of debate back and forth on what that proposal actually meant. I think you'll see, some legal challenges. You'll see a lot of different interpretations, but I think that will be something that will continue to be monitored, Michigan flavor. But you're right. Ever since the Dobbs decision, that has been a forefront issue, and I'm assuming will continue to be in some form. Now, exactly what form that will take, it's difficult to predict at this point.
I think it's a very complicated issue. I think the Catholic Church and other were very organized and very effective in their campaign. And I think there is a lot of parents became concerned. I've talked to people, the prosecutors have talked to me. I think parental involvement is still important, and people were told there wouldn't be parental consent, that there were people that were worried about were kids going to get sterilized, and there was a lot of, I would call it misinformation. I don't know what John, I want to respect him, but I think in the there was the proponents of, or the opposition to Proposal 2 were ran a good campaign. I think ultimately people are concerned about the separation of church and state, and women are concerned about their own personal health care. And there's a lot of issues that really, doctors were telling us. I mean, they really did talk to us about if someone had a miscarriage, were they going to be able to provide the appropriate medical treatment. And I do think that there was also a generational, it was very interesting to me that women who had worked their whole lifetime for progress for women on a number of many issues, cannot believe that it's not just this, but other things that they're looking at going backwards. And I think young people who have never had to fight for a lot of things that, you know, when I interviewed for my job at General Motors, I was asked, why would a woman want to work at GM? And I think it's great that young women have never had to face some of the challenges that we all have worked hard to gain, Title IX even. But we're just outraged that their personal health care could be dictated in a courtroom and not between them, their doctor, if they were married, their spouse, etc. And I think I thought long and hard, I would make a very different decision than someone else might make. I am a cat. I mean, now it's not a decision I have to face, and I could, but I do believe that this was an issue about separation of church and state too, and personal women's health care. I think a bill to codify Roe versus Wade passed the House. The Senate doesn't have the votes to pass it right now. I don't know what's going to happen. I think there will be an effort by others to codify. Many of the members of the Supreme Court, when they were that voted, had said in their testimony that it was the law of the land, and it clearly wasn't. And I don't think the issue is going away. I think it's a complicated, hard, tough issue, and quite frankly, it's the issue, one of the issues I hate the most having to deal with in public policy.
So just to sort of wrap that up, it sounds like it's an issue. It's not going anywhere, but resolution of that issue is not something we're going to see anytime soon. It's unlikely there's going to be a lot of action on this at the federal level, given the arrangements that we have. Well, I'd like to shift gears a little bit, just so talking about some of the things that happened in the election.
I don't think this issue.
Yes, John.
Oh, no, I don't think this issue is going away. I think this is something where, when people realize what Proposal 3 actually does for the state of Michigan, I think there will be some real buyer's remorse. And I think that will be something that will continue to be evaluated. The reason this issue, there are very different descriptions of what was on the ballot. Most, people like myself and others don't consider abortion to be healthcare, and feel like it's a tragedy of taking a human life, and there's definitely a role of government protecting innocent human life. So you have very strong opinions on different sides of this issue. We are where we are, and I think that will continue to be, people with very strong feelings.
Well, before I turn things over to Ben and have him dig in a little bit more into sort of what we can expect in 2023 and so on, I want to ask kind of a threshold question about what the signal the election brought to us. What does it really signal in terms of what the agenda will look like in Congress? Now, I realize we don't know who's going to control Congress, but we know it's going to be very, very close in either case. So, Debbie, do you want to take a crack at sort of the issues you think are going to be most kind of top of the agenda and how they might be approached?
Well, I mean, I think we're all worried about inflation and what we can do to continue to lower the cost of goods and in grocery stores, et cetera. I think that the cost of energy, gasoline, remains a real concern. The war in Ukraine is not something that any of us can escape, and it's a fight for democracy in the world. I think that foreign affairs has become far more complicated with both what Russia is up to. I think we're all worried about China and Asia. I think global warming is real. We're now looking right now as we're talking at another damaging hurricane. We've seen these, the wildfires in Florida, or in California, the tremendous flooding. We've even seen in the Midwest, the tornadoes, and how do we address these issues and for future generations, but also make sure that we've got an affordable, steady energy supply. I think affordable housing is an issue. Education's an issue that we gotta, there's disagreement on it in some ways, but we need to make sure that kids are behind. There's nobody that can deny that the pandemic has really hit our young people hard, and we got to figure out what we got to do to support them, and how do we make college and universities affordable. There's unfortunately no shortage of issues that we need to worry about. I am going to stand up loud and strong about any effort to privatize or eliminate Medicare and Social Security. Now, my colleague here hasn't gone out there on that one, but Rick Scott from Florida has. So, there's no shortage of major issues.
John, how do you see 2023 and sort of the issue palette turning out? John, are you? I know your connection was not too good before. Well, hopefully, John, or a member of his team.
Well, I think some of the huge concern today came out 7. You hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you now.
We can hear you, but you're
okay, great. I think, it's what?
We can hear you.
Okay, I think inflation has been a huge concern. 7.8% inflation. For the past 15 months, we've had it over 5%. And people's paychecks aren't going as far, and with the cost of gas and groceries. So I think Debbie is right on, and Washington D.C. has contributed to that. And so when it comes to the federal role, we got to stop spending these massive trillions of dollars. When President Biden wanted to stimulate the economy, it's a $2 trillion program, and we really haven't seen that benefit. In fact, it's only driven up inflation further. Same thing with some of these regulatory burdens on oil and gas, and what that's doing to the cost of energy. I'm very concerned that if Line 5 is shut down, that will also contribute to the high cost of people heating their homes. And so I think energy policy is a huge part that we need to get a better handle on and move in a better direction. But I would say those are a couple of key ones.
Jim, you're muted.
I should unmute myself. I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you. And I want to think a little bit about just implications coming up for 2023-2024 session. So, of course, it's still kind of up in the air because we do not know for sure who will be the majority party. But there are groups such as the House Freedom Caucus, which are talking a lot about changing the way the House operates, such as returning power to committee chairs and generally shifting power away from leadership. Do you think these efforts will succeed? What kind of changes to the House do you expect to see in this upcoming session? Debbie, do you want to go first?
What kind of, can you say that again?
Sure. What kind of changes to the House do you expect to see? I know a lot of it's going to be dependent on the majority party in power, but there was a recent memo with the House Freedom Caucus talking about returning more power to committee chairs or generally shifting power away from leadership. Do you see kind of structures of Congress changing going into this upcoming session?
So it depends which party is going to have control. But I actually think, as I had mentioned earlier, that the smaller majority, either party, is going to make it difficult for either party. The Republican Party, quite frankly, made some significant changes when Newt Gingrich became Speaker and actually tried to put more power into the hands of the chairs. and also put term limits in for, on the Republican side for their chairs. Quite frankly, on the Democratic side, whether we're, I don't know what they'll do. If we, we go into the minority, but there are a number of Democratic members that seek to actually duplicate what Republicans have done on term limits for committee chairs. In our caucus, it becomes more complicated because the Black Caucus supports seniority because that's how they feel that they get many leadership spots. But there are a lot of younger members that want to see those kinds of changes. And I would argue that committee chairs probably still drive the agenda on both sides of the aisle. And they're supposed to. I think in the Democratic side, it actually, the leadership probably drives the agenda more than, I think it's going to be interesting to see. If you want to know the truth, I think it's going to be interesting to see it all. I think it's going to be hard for leadership on either side. Whoever runs the House and who's ever there, those majorities are going to be so small, it's hard to build coalitions. And both parties are going to have to worry about not having circular firing squad. So I will say Republicans are much more effective at staying together and staying on message than than my party is. I'll be that blunt. So I think to their detriment sometimes too.
Thank you. And then turn it over to Congressman Moolenaar.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Debbie makes a good point about how, people seek these leadership positions, but it's not an easy job. And so it is something that I think whoever's in the majority, it will be a smaller majority, and you're going to have to find ways to get your whole team working together. And I would say, anytime you have a caucus, whether it's the Freedom Caucus or another caucus that kind of puts a line in the sand and says, okay, we're demanding these changes, that's certainly something that gets the attention in Washington, D.C., because you need a certain number of people to support whatever rule or whatever change in the rules. So we're going to be voting on those things next week. I haven't had a chance to really look into, what all the different proposals are. But yeah, those are always very debatable kinds of questions. One of the things that will be debated is the area of congressionally directed spending for project spending on, in the appropriations process. That will be something that, we've done in the last couple cycles. And I think, we've seen some really positive things resulting for that. But of course, there's the fear that, if earmarks can be abused. And so that will be something I think that will come up for discussion as well. But I think whoever's in leadership role are going to have to find ways to work together with, kind of the entire team and hopefully have a collegial spirit of getting things done.
Thank you. And then one more question, and I'll switch it back over to Jim. Representative McCarthy and others have indicated they plan to conduct investigations targeting the Biden administration actions, things like COVID response, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, to the Justice Department's investigation of President Trump's handling of classified documents, to the actions of Hunter Biden. What do you see coming up soon in terms of congressional oversight and investigations? And I know a lot of it's dependent on leadership and on the majority, but what would you like to see?
Well, I think there's a legitimate role for Congress to have oversight in whether it's the Judiciary Committee looking at the role of the Justice Department, whether it's Foreign Affairs looking at, the policy with respect to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Those are all legitimate functions. And to me, I hope we can get to the bottom of some of these questions, but do it in a way where, it's also complementary to promoting, in my case, I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and our oversight role is to make sure that taxpayer dollars, are spent wisely according to law and as, Congress had directed, and then holding, that will be my role. I think all of those are legitimate oversight responsibilities. Of course, there's always, political issues and debate about what kinds of investigations, but, to me, we want to make the most use of our oversight responsibilities in a responsible way.
Thank you. Congresswoman Dingell?
So I hope that we aren't a total oversight. We're going to have to see. We're going to obviously who's got control of the House, and it's very clear what the Republicans are going to want to do. And there's legitimate oversight. The man that I was married to and the man that the Levin Center is named after were both well known for their oversight responsibilities and roles. I think it's important that we try to not make oversight partisan, but it be substantive. And I think if Republicans do have the majority, and if all they do is to do oversight for 2 years, and some of it's not fair, that they will pay, there will be consequences in 2024. And I just think that I'm just somebody that thinks our democracy can go one way or the other. I'm worried about it. I think what happened both in the Michigan State Capitol and January 6th shows you that I don't think that, by the way, and I'm always very careful, John knows this, I don't think it's all Republicans. I do think many people who came to Washington on January 6th were just they just wanted to be part of being concerned about what was happening, didn't come to the Capitol with the intentions that some did. But I also think the American people are worried about what's happening. I think we have to start standing up to hate wherever we see it. I think that there are people that are intentional, trying to pit us against each other, that are trying to spread this fear and hatred. It is a documented fact. Russia, right before the election, that Russia is trying to fund some of this. And I think we got to be worried about our democracy and the fundamental roots of it. And I'm going to keep working across the aisle. John Moolenaar, I'm hoping we can keep our offices close to each other, though my staff says to me that should be my number one. Finding good office space matters. We have to move this year because they're going to construct, and I'm someone that always goes to the other side of the aisle on the floor, and I have many friends and I talk to them. I think we both acknowledge that inflation is our number one issue that people are worried about, cost of gas prices. And I think John would even agree with me that we got to worry about climate change. And we'll see where it's going to go. But I hope these hearings are not destructive to our democracy.
Congressman Moolenaar?
I'm sorry, Ben.
Sorry, I didn't. You already responded?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize. Yep.
Oh, that's all right.
Jim?
No worries. Let me ask you both about the conduct of the election, what you saw occur this go around in the election. It doesn't appear, obviously, there don't seem to be nearly as many, concerns being raised. But I wondered about how you thought things were going to go coming into the election, and then how you saw it play out in your own districts in Michigan and then around the country, kind of what you're hearing from your colleagues. John, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think, we benefit from having an election process where, we get results turned around fairly quickly. I'm concerned about some of these states that, take days in order to kind of get the final numbers. That always creates a lot of uncertainty and I know there's many states that are still working through some of these things. So I think our elections in Michigan were turned around. The results were known, fairly soon for the most part. Obviously there's still some contested races that are very close, but that to me inspires confidence. And I think a few things. One, I think it was important that we didn't have, under COVID, we had these sort of unsolicited absentee ballot applications that were sent out. I think that raised a lot of red flags. I think this question of how do you validate that, a ballot that comes in, an absentee ballot is who, they say they are. Those are all legitimate questions, and because you want to ensure the integrity of the vote. And I think in Michigan, it was, I'm not aware of a lot of discrepancies or concerns that have been raised across the state.
Debbie, what are your
So, I think, well, first of all, I think we haven't seen a lot yet, but I think these next few days and weeks, we're unfortunately probably going to see more than some of us want to, as we look at some of these states like Arizona and Nevada and others that are still waiting for the returns. But I hope that our board of canvassers will certify this election, but the numbers of 2-2, the record here has not always shown that that's happened in the last few elections, so we don't know what's going to happen. I think it will be dealt with. I was concerned by things that were happening, that people were being trained to be disruptors. There were incidents at polls where there were things that happened at polls, but we tried to make sure that we kept it as calm. There were places where poll watchers were rejected. Instead of, you tried not to create an incident. And I think that was very important. And probably one of the things that I felt the best about, well, there were two things on election day that, I don't know what they were. I had mixed feelings about one of them, and I'll go to that in a minute. But I went down to Trenton, Michigan, which it's probably reflective of America. It's got a lot of, it's just a great city, and I'm really proud to represent it, and I once lived there. But it's a 50-50 city. and the family of the Republican candidate for state legislature was there. And I nominated their daughter for the military academy, and they're very happy about that. And there was the highest turnout there had ever been in Trenton, Michigan. And that parking lot, it was 6 o'clock at night and it was dark, and I'd never seen it so full. And we hugged each other right in the middle between the two groups and turned to everybody and said, this is what politics should be, civility. And I think that's important. And that made me feel good. Unfortunately, there were one of the 18-year-old volunteers downriver had a man threaten to put a bullet through his head, which John would not have approved of any more than I did. One of our candidates had somebody take his finger and like he was going to shoot her. So there were things that weren't good, but I think people like John and I stand up for polls to be that not to happen. We'll see what's going to happen here when we come to the certification process. I do think people were trained to be disruptors, and I want to thank the clerks, Republican and Democrat around the state, that worked hard to make sure that every vote counted, that we cannot let people undermine their confidence in the electoral process, that their vote counts. And we have been very blessed. Mike Shirkey, as majority leader, stood up for that 2 years ago. And while I think people have tried to cause issues in some places, that Republicans and Democrats have worked together in the state in many places to make sure that we maximize participation. Everybody was safe and every vote counts.
Just on that issue, Debbie, of maximizing participation, there were some reports that there were some issues in at least a polling place in Ann Arbor where students had to wait a long time.
That was my second thing I was going to talk to you about. I had very mixed feelings about that. I was there I kept going back and forth. We have to figure it was incredible. I mean, to see the kids lined up, but I was there I was there in the morning, and then I went back 3:30 to 5:30, and I got to tell you, I'm losing my voice, and There he is, done some airport stuff. I was freezing and chilled to the bone. I couldn't warm up after being outside with the kids for 3:30 to 5:30. And then I went back to be there at 8 o'clock because had been assured that everybody that was in line would be able to vote, and wanted to make sure that there were no problems. And I had mixed reactions. It was exciting to see so many kids turn out and to know that their vote mattered, and it was the spirit of democracy. I have questions and have asked them, trust me, to my side, about why does this take so long? And I do think we have to really look at this issue. I think it's, people were saying to me, how do we get these kids to register early and do? And I'm like, okay, today's not the day that we're going to be able to answer that question. Why don't we have more poll workers? Why don't we have, and I understand it's complicated and we got to get more machines, but I said to the mayor, and the mayor of Ann Arbor has nothing to do with it. This is a Secretary of State and a clerk's problem. But I said to the mayor, why am I always outside with you on election night, looking at kids in a long line? And it was cold. But I have to tell you, it was also, there was just something about seeing it at 8 o'clock at night, a call went out and it was cold. I'm telling you, and I've got thinner skin than you guys do, probably in more than one way. But a call went out and members of the community brought blankets for the kids to wrap themselves. I was standing there with Jason Morgan, and a DoorDash driver arrived with 35 blankets from Big Lot that someone had just seen and ordered so they could stay long. And someone said, what are you saying to the kids? And I didn't say anything political. I didn't want to. I didn't think it was the right thing. I have no idea how they voted. I'm sure a lot of people were guessing, but it just was great to see kids understand their vote counted. Now I got to worry about some of the kids missed a test or two because it was a 6-hour line and at one point. And I would like to see maybe the university and campuses either have the day off on election day. Should we have election day as a national holiday? Or maybe they don't give tests or exams on the election day. And we do need to get people to register early. So I have very mixed feelings, but it did show that they knew the value of the importance of the vote.
John, how does this play out in your district or as you see it? Sort of access to the ballot and sort of the resources that county clerks need or that local polling places need. Do you see an issue there? Do you see a need for more investment to strengthen the system?
I just in terms of how our election went on my district, certainly there was active, participation, and we saw a lot of people who were volunteering, helping at the polls, doing things. My mother-in-law, who's in her 80s, volunteered, all day into the evening, helping out at her polling location. So I thought there was really good support for this process and a lot of public engagement.
We do need to, John, I want to go in and behind in more suburban areas. I think the Republican clerks across the state and Democratic clerks really have tried, but they're having a harder time recruiting volunteers too. And some people have been worried about, COVID impacted it too, because there's still people who are being careful and don't want it, but we're concerned about potential violence, etc. We need those volunteers. They're the most important thing we can do is to protecting that vote. So I think we would both encourage people to volunteer to help in their local polls where they can, because it really does matter. It's the backbone of democracy.
I want to get to at least one question. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, and I want to make sure some of them have already been really addressed, but I want to get to one from a member of the audience who was asking about the effect that election denialism, for lack of a better term, had on this election. It seemed that in a number of states, and certainly maybe in Michigan, that candidates that were really denying the legitimacy of the last election and questioning, or expressing doubt about whether they would accept the result of the election they were in, that those candidates did not fare terribly well. except in maybe some areas.
Jim,
So I want to ask about that. What do you think that's going to have an effect on the Republican Party in terms of how it views candidates that take those kinds of positions? John, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I was putting it on mute because there was an announcement going overhead. We'll have to look at, kind of the elections across the, and to me, the goal should be to have fair elections, accountable elections, and make sure that the rules are followed by, all sides. And to me, that should be our goal throughout. But, I haven't had a chance to really look at, how each candidate did who had different positions on those issues. One thing that I should point out, though, is that, throughout history, there have been people who have challenged the election outcomes. Stacey Abrams, never conceded in the past election. I see that she did this time in Georgia, but, there have often been, in Congress, there have been Democrats who have contested the outcome of elections. So to me, I think our party needs to make sure that we're promoting election integrity and promoting confidence in the election and supporting our local clerks. And that's something we can continue to do. But, I don't know that there's been some analysis of different positions and how that all fared, across the state or across the country.
Debbie, what do you think?
May I have your attention, please, as a
I
courtesy?
think it's complicated. There are, I'm going to tell you a story. I was in Belleville, Michigan, which is one of the cities in my district, and two UAW guys came up to me and said, "Can we talk to you?" And had a discussion about voter ID and when you have to show ID for other things, and why shouldn't you have to show your ID? And I do think you have to. There are plenty of check balance system checks and balances so that we do know who's voting. And I made the point that and they tried to do this in Detroit, that, seniors who are on absentee ballot lists have been voting by AV for a long time. And for many of them, if they have to go in to the clerk's office to show their ID to be able to vote, they're not going to be able to vote. And one of them said, that's a problem for my mother. I agree with that. And then we proceeded to have a discussion about President Trump, who I don't like his style of fear and the way that he treats people. I don't think he's respectful of people at times. And they agreed with me in that, but they liked his policies. But at the end of the discussion, they said, but we still think President Trump won the election. So there are a lot of people, there are election deniers in the community. And what I worry about is you got to believe, you have to have a sense of trust in your local clerk and then throughout the system that your vote is being counted honestly and accurately. And I do believe that there are people that are trying to undermine people's confidence in election outcomes, which is why I will always respect Senator Shirkey for what he did do when people tried to force him into challenging the outcome. Our democracy is in trouble if people don't have confidence in their vote being accurately counted, if they don't have confidence in the system. That leads to the loss of democracy. So I know that there are people that still do not believe to this day that Joe Biden won the election. And I do know that there are people that are that don't believe he won, that it impacted how they vote. I think we need to worry about people's trying to undermine people's confidence in a number of institutions, but this is one of the biggest dangers we have to our democracy.
Knowing that we're running sort of toward the end here. We're starting to run out of time. Ben, I just wanted to maybe turn it to you for a final question that deals with, another real challenge to our democracy, which is the loss of civility and civic trust and civic discourse in our society. And Ben, do you want to ask? I thought you had some questions about that really are worth talking about.
I do. I would like to say, because I just kind of get a nice way to wrap. Do you believe that this lack of familiarity with those holding political views different than one's own is a driving force for the divisiveness of today's politics, today's moment? And maybe Congressman Moolenaar, I want to go first.
Sure. I think that's a very good insight. One of the things I appreciate about Debbie is, we can agree or disagree on policies, but there's also a mutual respect and appreciation, recognizing each of us, is trying to do what we believe is best for our country. And I think the better you know someone, what they're about, it's much more difficult to have that kind of vitriol towards them. And so to me, that's a huge part of moving forward as a country, where we can have civilized discussions, have civility in our debate. It's something that I believe is very important, and where we've lost that, we need to regain that.
I agree with John. I think relationships matter. I think it's very hard to demonize someone if you know them. I think social media is the worst thing that's happened to this country. Somebody took me on Facebook and said it wasn't founded for this reason, but social media started to connect us, to bring us together. I'm one of those people that reads what everybody posts on their social media, which they tell you not to. And the person came back at me and said, no, it was so that men could go after women. But I think social media has, I'll say to the kids that work for me, did you call them? Did you talk to them? It's become too easy to text. We don't have real conversations. The pandemic has aggravated it even more, that we don't see each other. We don't get to know each other. In the Congress, I can't get off the plane now and not think about Jackie. For me, it's John and I have a colleague that it was the plane time. It was the only time you really got to know your bipartisan members, unfortunately. And in some ways, we come in on the last plane before we have to vote. And I'm the leader of the pack as we race to the plane I watch out for everybody to make sure that if we're running late, they know you got 10 members coming to get this plane. And when you don't talk to people, when you don't develop relationships, when you don't know each other, it's much easier to demonize. And social media has also become a tool of bullying, of being anonymous and saying some of the worst and most awful things, instead of people really getting to know who somebody is and that you can disagree agreeably. Civility is something that matters. And in the Bible, they taught us to treat others as we would have others treat us.
Well, in conversations like the one we've had this afternoon certainly helps. I really appreciate you both taking the time. I'll pivot back over to Jim here for a wrap up.
Yeah. Let me add my thanks both to you, Congressman Moolenaar, and you, Congresswoman Dingell. You all just really represent the kind of dialogue and the kind of civility that we at the Levin Center feel is so important. And I think many, many people around the state and around the country believe that if we just start talking to each other more and engage each other more, that we have we can really solve a lot of our problems and reinforce our democracy. I think that point that both of you made just now, is a great way to close. And I would just add that at the Levin Center, what we're really seeking to do is build up the notion and the belief and the expectation that people who serve in offices like John and Debbie are serving have this responsibility to work together on fact finding, on trying to get at the important information that the public needs to know and that lawmakers need to know in order to make good policy. That was always the way that Senator Levin worked with his Republican colleagues. They may not have agreed on many things, but they could agree on their approach to uncovering the facts and getting at the truth. We don't know what the truth is completely ever, right? But we have to be willing to work together to pursue it as best we can. And to us, that's a way that you can build relationships and build some empathy for the other side's point of view. Doesn't mean you're going to adopt their point of view, but it means you have that respect that John was talking about. And so that's what we're trying to do here at the Levin Center. Obviously, we don't know a lot about what's going to happen in the next few days or maybe even few weeks about balancing Congress, but it does appear that we are going to see a lot of focus on inflation, a lot of focus on the war in Iraq and where we're going with that, and just generally a lot of focus on on national security. I think concerns about Russia, concerns about China certainly seem to be at the top of both of your lists, and that issues that do divide us quite a bit, issues like reproductive freedom or right to life, whatever you want to call that, is something that's going to be with us, even though there was some movements in this election. It's not something that's going to be resolved anytime soon. So I think we're out of time. I think, John, you've got a plane to catch, and we need to wrap things up. But I want to say to both of you, Representative Dingell, Representative Moolenaar, we so appreciate your participation. Ben, thank you for your hard work, and thank you to everyone who watched today. And we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Fly safe.
Great being with you.